Chapter 9. How Danny was ensnared by a vacuum cleaner and how Danny's friends rescued him. Dolores and Gracia Ramirez lived in her own little house on the upper edge of Tortilla Flat. She did housework for some of the ladies in Monterey, and she belonged to the native daughters of the Golden West. She was not pretty, this lean-faced paisana, but there was in her figure a certain voluptuousness of movement. There was in her voice a throatiness some men found indicative. Her eyes can burn behind a mist with a sleepy passion which those men to whom the flesh is important found attractive and downright inviting. In her brusque moments she was not desirable, but an amorous combination came about within her often enough so that she was called Sweets Ramirez on Tortilla Flat. It was a pleasant thing to see her when the beast in her was prowling. How she leaned over her front gate. How her voice purred drowsily. How her hips moved gently about, now pressing against the fence, now swelling back like a summer beach wave, and then pressing the fence again. Who in the world could put so much husky meaning into, "Ay, amiga, ¿a dónde vas?" It is true that ordinarily her voice was shrill, her face hard and sharp as a hatchet, her figure lumpy and her intentions selfish. The softer self came into possession only once or twice a week, and then, ordinarily, in the evening. When Sweets heard that Danny was an heir, she was glad for him. She dreamed of being his lady, as did every other female on Tortilla Flat. In the evenings, she leaned over the front gate, waiting for the time when he would pass by and fall into her trap. But for a long time her baited trap caught nothing but poor Indians and paisanos who owned no houses and whose clothes were sometimes fugitive from better wardrobes. Sweets was not content. Her house was up on the hill from Danny's house, in a direction he did not often take. Sweets could not go looking for him. She was a lady, and her conduct was governed by very strict rules of property. If Danny should walk by now, if they should talk like the old friends they were, if he should come in for a social glass of wine, and then if nature proved too strong and her feminine resistance too weak, there was no grave breach of propriety, but it was unthinkable to leave her web on the front gate. For many months of evenings she waited in vain, and took such gifts as walked by in jeans. But there are only a limited number of pathways on Tortilla Flat. It was inevitable that Danny should, sooner or later, pass the gate of Dolores and Gracia Ramirez, and so he did. In all the time they had known each other, there had never been an occasion when it was more to Sweet's advantage to have him walk by. For Danny had only that morning found a keg of copper shingle nails, lost by the Central Supply Company. He had judged them jetsam because no member of the company was anywhere near. Danny removed the copper nails from the keg and put them in his sack. Then, borrowing from the pirate's wheelbarrow and the pirate to push it, he took his salvage to the Western Supply Company, where he sold the copper for $3. The keg he gave to the pirate. "You can keep things in it," he said. That made the pirate very happy. And now Danny came down the hill, aimed with a fine accuracy toward the house of Torelli, and the $3 were in his pocket. Dolores' voice sounded as huskily sweet as the drone of a bumblebee. "Ay, amigo, ¿a dónde vas?" Danny stopped. A revolution took place in his plans. "How are you, Sweets?" "What difference is it how I am? None of my friends are interested," she said archly, and her hips floated in a graceful and circular undulation. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "Well, does my friend Danny ever come to see me?" "I'm here to see thee now," he said gallantly. She opened the gate a little. "Wilt thou come in for a tiny glass of wine in friendship's name?" Danny went into her house. "What hast thou been doing in the forest?" she cooed. Then he made an error. He told vaingloriously of his transaction up the hill and boasted of his $3. Of course, I only have enough wine to fill 2 thimbles, he said. They sat in Sweet's kitchen and drank a glass of wine. In a little while, Danny assaulted her virtue with true gallantry and vigor. He found, to his amazement, a resistance out of all proportion to her size and reputation. The ugly beast of lust was awakened in him. He was angry. Only when he was leaving was the way made clear to him. The husky voice said, "Maybe you would like to come and see me this evening, Danny." Sweet's eyes swam in a mist of drowsy invitation. "One has neighbors," she suggested with delicacy, and he understood. "I will come back," he promised. It was mid-afternoon. Danny walked down the street, re-aimed at Torelli's, and the beast in him had changed. From a savage and snarling wolf, it had become a great, shaggy, sentimental bear. "I will take wine to that nice Sweet's," he thought. On the way down, whom should he meet but Pablo? And Pablo had 2 sticks of gum. He gave one to Danny and fell into step. "Where goest thou?" "It is no time for friendship," Danny said tartly. "First I go to buy a little wine to take to a lady. You may come with me and have 1 glass only. I am tired of buying wine for ladies, only to have my friends drink it all up." Pablo agreed that such a practice was unendurable. For himself, he didn't want Danny's wine, but only his companionship. They went to Torelli's. They had a glass of wine out of the new-bought gallon. Danny confessed that it was shabby treatment to give his friend only 1 little glass. Over Pablo's passionate protest, they had another. Ladies, Danny thought, should not drink too much wine. They were apt to become silly, and besides it dulled some of those senses one liked to find alert in a lady. They had a few more glasses. Half a gallon of wine was a bountiful present, especially as Danny was about to go down to buy another present. They measured down half a gallon and drank what was over. Then Danny hid the jug in the weeds in a ditch. "I would like you to come with me to buy the present, Pablo," he said. Pablo knew the reason for the invitation. Half of it was a desire for Pablo's company, and half was fear of leaving the wine while Pablo was at large. They walked with studied dignity and straightness down the hill of Monterey. Mr. Simon of Simon's Investment, Jewelry and Loan Company welcomed them into his store. The name of the store defined the outward limits of the merchandise the company sold, for there were saxophones, radios, rifles, knives, fishing rods, and old coins on the counter, all second-hand, but all really better than new because they were just well broken in. "Something you would like to see?" Mr. Simon asked. "Yes," said Danny. The proprietor named over a tentative list and then stopped in the middle of a word, for he saw that Danny was looking at a large aluminum vacuum cleaner. The dust bag was blue and yellow checks. The electric cord was long and black and slick. Mr. Simon went to it and rubbed it with his hand and stood off and admired it. "Something in a vacuum cleaner?" he asked. "How much?" "For this one, $14. It was not a price so much as an endeavor to find out how much Danny had, and Danny wanted it, for it was large and shiny. No woman of Tortilla Flat had one. In this moment he forgot there was no electricity on Tortilla Flat. He laid his $2 on the counter and waited while the explosion took place. The fury, the rage, the sadness, the poverty, the ruin, the cheating. The polish was invoked, the color of the bag, the extra long cord, the value of the metal alone. And when it was all over, Danny went out carrying the vacuum cleaner. Often, as a pasatiempo in the afternoon, Sweets brought out the vacuum cleaner and leaned it against a chair. While her friends looked on, she pushed it back and forth to show how easily it rolled. And she made a humming with her voice to imitate a motor. "My friend is a rich man," she said. "I think pretty soon there will be wires full of electricity coming right into the house. And then zip and zip and zip, and you have the house clean." Her friends tried to belittle the present, saying, "It is too bad you can't run this machine," and "I have always held that a broom and dustpan properly used, are more thorough. But their envy could do nothing against the vacuum. Through its possession, Sweets climbed to the peak of the social scale of Tortilla Flat. People who did not remember her name referred to her as, quote, that one with the sweeping machine, end quote. Often when her enemies passed the house, Sweets could be seen through the window pushing the cleaner back and forth, while a loud humming came from her throat. Indeed, after she had swept her house every day, she pushed the cleaner about on the theory that, of course, it would be cleaned better with electricity, but one could not have everything. She excited envy in many houses. Her manner became dignified and gracious, and she held her chin high, as befitted one who had a sweeping machine. In her conversation, she included it. Ramon passed this morning while I was pushing the sweeping machine. Louise Meter cut her hand this morning, not 3 hours after I'd been pushing the sweeping machine. But in her elevation, she did not neglect Danny. Her voice growled with emotion when he was about. She swayed like a pine tree in the wind, and he spent every evening at the House of Sweets. At first, his friends ignored his absence, for it is the right of every man to have these little affairs. But as the weeks went on, and as a rather violent domestic life began to make Danny listless and pale, his friends became convinced that Sweets' gratitude for the sweeping machine was not to Danny's best physical interests. They were just jealous of a situation that was holding his attention so long. Pilon and Pablo and Jesus Maria Corcoran in turn assaulted the nest of his affections during his absence. But Sweets, while she was sensible of the compliment, remained true to the man who had raised her position to such a gratifying level. She tried to keep their friendship for a future time of need, for she knew how fickle fortune is. But she stoutly refused to share with Danny's friends that which was dedicated for the time being to Danny. Wherefore the friends, in despair, organized a group formed for and dedicated to her destruction. It may be that Danny, deep in his soul, was beginning to tire of Sweets' affection and the duty of attendance it demanded. If such a change were taking place, he did not admit it to himself. At 3 o'clock one afternoon, Pilon and Pablo and Jesus Maria, followed vaguely by Big Joe Portagee, returned triumphant from 3/4 of a day of strenuous effort. Their campaign had called into play and taxed to the limit the pitiless logic of Pilon, the artistic ingenuousness of Pablo, and the gentleness and humanity of Jesus Maria Corcoran. Big Joe had contributed nothing. But now, like 4 hunters, they returned from the chase more happy because their victory had been a difficult one. And in Monterey, a poor puzzled Italian came gradually to the conviction that he had been swindled. Pilon carried a gallon jug of wine concealed in a bundle of ivy. They marched joyfully into Danny's house, and Pilon set the gallon on the table. Danny, awakened out of a sound sleep, smiled quietly, got up from bed, and laid out the fruit jars. He poured the wine. His 4 friends fell into chairs, for it had been an exhausting day. They drank quietly in the late afternoon, that time of curious intermission. Nearly everyone in Tortilla Flat stops then and considers those things that have taken place in the day just past and thinks over the possibilities of the evening. There are many things to discuss in the afternoon. Cornelia Ruiz got a new man this morning, Pilon observed. He has a bald head. His name is Kilpatrick. Cornelia says her other man didn't come home 3 nights last week. She didn't like that. Cornelia is a woman who changes her mind too quickly, said Danny. He thought complacently of his own sure establishment built on the rock of the vacuum cleaner. Cornelia's father was worse, said Pablo. He could not tell the truth. Once he borrowed $1 from me. I have told Cornelia about it, and she does nothing. 2 of 1 blood. Know the breed and know the dog, Pilon quoted virtuously. Danny poured jars of full wine again, and the gallon was exhausted. He looked ruefully at it. Jesus Maria, that lover of the humanities, spoke up quietly. I saw Susie Francisco, Pilon. She said the recipe worked fine. She has been out riding with Charlie Guzman on his motorcycle 3 times. The first 2 times, she gave him the love medicine. It made him sick. She thought it was no good. But now Susie says you can have some cookies any time. What was in that potion? Pablo asked. Pilon became secretive. I cannot tell all of it. I guess it must have been the poison oak in it that made Charlie Guzman sick. The gallon of wine had gone too quickly. Each of the 6 friends was conscious of a thirst so sharp that it was a pain of desire. Pilon looked at his friends with drooped eyes, and they looked back at him. The conspiracy was ready. Pilon cleared his throat. What hast thou done, Danny, to set the whole town laughing at thee? Danny looked worried. What do you mean? Pilon chuckled. It is said by many that you bought a sweeping machine for a lady, and that machine will not work unless wires are put into the house. Those wires cost a great deal of money. Some people find this present very funny. Danny grew uncomfortable. That lady likes the sweeping machine, he said defensively. Why not? Pablo agreed. She has told some people that you have promised to put wires into her house so the sweeping machine will work. Danny looked even more perturbed. Did she say that? So I was told. Well, I will not, Danny cried. If I did not think it funny, I should be angry to hear my friend laughed at, Pilon observed. What will you do when she asks for those wires? Jesus Maria asked. I will tell her no, said Danny. Pilon laughed. I wish I could be there. It is not such a simple thing to tell that lady no. Danny felt that his friends were turning against him. What shall I do? He asked helplessly. Pilon gave the matter his grave consideration and brought his realism to bear on the subject. If that lady did not have the sweeping machine, she would not want those wires, he said. The friends nodded in agreement. Therefore, Pilon continued, the thing to do is to remove the sweeping machine. Oh, she wouldn't let me take it, Danny protested. Then we will help you, said Pilon. I will take the machine, and in return you can take the lady a present of a gallon of wine. She will not even know where the sleeping machine has gone. Some neighbors will see you take it. Oh, no, said Pilon. You stay here, Danny. I will get the machine. Danny sighed with relief that his problem was assumed by his good friends. There were few things going on in Tortilla Flat that Pilon did not know. His mind made sharp little notes of everything that his eyes saw or his ears heard. He knew that Sweets went to the store at 4:30 every afternoon. He depended upon this almost invariable habit to put his plan into effect. It is better that you do not know anything about it, he told Danny. In the yard, Pilon had a gunny sack in readiness. With his knife, he cut a generous branch from the rose bush and pushed it into the sack. At Sweets' house, he found her absent, as he had expected and hoped she would be. It is really Danny's machine, he told himself. It was a moment's work to enter the house, to put the vacuum cleaner in the sack, and to arrange the rose branch artistically in the sack's mouth. As he came out of the yard, he met Sweets. Pilon took off his hat politely. I stepped in to pass the time, he said. Will you stop now, Pilon? No, I have business in Monterey. It is late. Where do you go with this rose bush? A man in Monterey is to buy it, a very fine rose bush. See how strong it is? Stop in some other time, Pilon. He heard no cry of anger as he walked sedately down the street. Perhaps she will not miss it for a while, he thought. Half the problem was solved, but half was yet to be approached. What can Danny do with this sweeping machine? Pilon asked himself. If he has it, Sweets will know he has taken it. Can I throw it away? No, for it is valuable. The thing to do would be to get rid of it, and still to reap the benefit of its value. Now the whole problem was solved. Pilon headed down the hill toward toward Torelli's house. It was a large and shiny vacuum cleaner. When Pilon came again up the hill, he had a gallon of wine in each hand. The friends received him in silence when he entered Danny's house. He set one jug on the table and the other on the floor. "I have brought you a present to take to the lady," he told Danny, "and here is a little wine for us." They gathered happily, for their thirst was a raging fire. When the first gallon was far gone, Pilon held his glass to the candlelight and looked through it. "Things that happen are of no importance," he said. "But from everything that happens, there is a lesson to be learned. By this, we learn that a present, especially to a lady, should have no quality that will require a further present. Also, we learn that it is sinful to give presents of too great value, for they may excite greed." The first gallon was gone. The friends looked at Danny to see how he felt about it. He had been very quiet, but now he saw that his friends were waiting on him. "That lady was lively," he said judiciously. "That lady had a very sympathetic nature. But God damn it," he said, "I'm sick of it." He went to the second jug and drew the cork. The pirate, sitting in the corner among his dogs, smiled to himself and whispered in admiration, "God damn it, I'm sick of it." That, thought the pirate, was very fine. They had not more than half finished the second jug. Indeed, they had sung only 2 songs when young Johnny Pom-Pom came in. "I was at Torelli's," Johnny said. "Oh, that Torelli is mad. He is shouting. He is beating on the table with his fists." The friends looked up with mild interest. "Something has happened. It is probable Torelli deserves it. Often he has refused his good customers a little glass of wine." "What is the matter with Torelli?" Pablo asked. Johnny Pom-Pom accepted a jar of wine. "Torelli says he bought a sweeping machine from Pilon, and when he hooked it up to his light wire, it would not work. So he looked on the inside and it had no motor. He says he will kill Pilon." Pilon looked shocked. "I did not know this machine was at fault," he said. "But did I not say Torelli deserved what was the matter with him? That machine was worth 3 or 4 gallons of wine, but that miser Torelli would give no more than 2. Danny still felt a glow of gratitude toward Pilon. He smacked his lips on his wine. "This stuff of Torelli's is getting worse and worse," he said. "At its best, it is swill the pigs leave, but lately it is so bad that Charlie Marsh even would not drink it." They all felt a little bit revenged on Torelli then. "I think," said Danny, "that we will buy our wine someplace else, if Torelli does not look out." Chapter 10. How the friends solaced a corporal and in return received a lesson in paternal ethics. Jesus Maria Corcoran was a pathway for the humanities. Suffering he tried to relieve, sorrow he tried to assuage. Happiness he shared. No hard nor haunted Jesus Maria existed. His heart was free for the use of anyone who had a use for it. His resources and wits were at the disposal of anyone who had less of either than Jesus Maria. He it was who carried Jose de la Nariz 4 miles when Jose's leg was broken. When Mrs. Palachico lost the goat of her heart, the good goat of milk and cheese, it was Jesus Maria who traced that goat to Big Joe Portagee and halted the murder and made Big Joe give it back. It was Jesus Maria who once picked Charlie Marsh out of a ditch where he lay in his own filth, a deed which required not only a warm heart but a strong stomach. Together with his capacity for doing good, Jesus Maria had a gift for coming in contact with situations where good wanted doing. Such was his reputation that Pilon once said, "If that Jesus Maria had gone into the church, Monterey would have had a saint for the calendar, I tell you." Out of some deep pouch in his soul, Jesus Maria drew kindness that renewed itself by withdrawal. It was Jesus Maria's practice to go to the post office every day, first because there he could see many people whom he knew, and second because on that windy post office corner he can look at the legs of a great many girls. It must not be supposed that in this latter interest there was any vulgarity. As soon criticize a man who goes to art galleries or to concerts. Jesus Maria liked to look at girls' legs. One day, when he leaned against a post office for 2 hours with very little success, he was witness to a pitiful scene. A policeman came along the sidewalk, leading a young boy of about 16, and the boy carried a little baby, wrapped in a piece of gray blanket. The policeman was saying, "I don't care if I can't understand you. You can't sit in the gutter all day. We'll find out about you." And the boy, in Spanish, with a peculiar inflection, said, "But, senor, I do nothing wrong. Why do you take me away?" The policeman saw Jesus Maria. "Hey, paisano," he called. "What's this cholo talking about?" Jesus Maria stepped out and addressed the boy. "Can I be of service to you?" The boy broke into a relieved flood. "I came here to work. Some Mexican men said there would be work here, and there was none. I was sitting down resting when this man came to me and dragged me away." Jesus Maria nodded and turned back to the policeman. "He has done some crime, this little one?" "No, he's been sitting in the gutter on Alvarado Street for about 3 hours. "He is a friend of mine," Jesus Maria said. "I will take care of him." "Well, keep him out of the gutter." Jesus Maria and his new friend walked up the hill. "I will take you to the house where I live. There you will have something to eat. What baby is this?" "It is my baby," said the boy. "I am CORPORAL, and he is my baby. He is sick now, but when he grows up, he is going to be a general." "What is he sick from, Senor Caporal?" "I don't know. He is just sick." He showed the baby's face, and it looked very ill indeed. The sympathies of Jesus Maria mounted. "The house where I lived is owned by my friend Danny, and there is a good man, Senor Caporal. There is no one to appeal when trouble is upon one. Look, we will go there, and that Danny will give us shelter. My friend, Mrs. Palachico, has a goat. We will borrow a little milk for the baby." The corporal's face, for the first time, wore a smile of comfort. "It is good to have friends," he said. "In Torreon, I have many friends who would make themselves beggars to help me." He boasted little to Jesus Maria. "I have rich friends, but of course they do not know my need." Pilon pushed open the gate of Danny's yard and they entered together. Danny and Pablo and Big Joe were sitting in the living room, waiting for the daily miracle of food. Jesus Maria pushed the boy into the room. "Here is a young soldier, a caporal," he explained. "He has a baby here with him, and that baby is sick." The friends arose with alacrity. The corporal threw back the gray blanket from the baby's face. "He is sick, all right," Danny said. "Maybe we should get a doctor." But the soldier shook his head. "No doctors. I do not like doctors. This baby does not cry, and he will not eat much. Maybe when he rests, then he will be well again." At this moment, Pilon entered and inspected the child. "This baby is sick," he said. Pilon immediately took control. Jesus Maria he sent to Mrs. Palachico's house to borrow goat milk. Big Joe and Pablo to get an apple box, pad it with dry grass, and line it with a sheepskin coat. Danny offered his bed, but it was refused. The corporal stood in the living room and smiled gently on these good people. At last the baby lay in its box, but its eyes were listless, and it refused the milk. The pirate came in, bearing a bag of mackerels. The friends cooked the fish and had their dinner. The baby would not even eat mackerel. Every now and then, one of the friends jumped up and ran to look at the baby. When supper was over, they sat about the stove and prepared for a quiet evening. The corporal had been silent, had given no account of himself. The friends were a little hurt at this, but they knew he would tell them in time. Pilon, to whom knowledge was as gold to be mined, made a few tentative drills into the corporal's reticence. "It is not often that one sees a young soldier with a baby," he suggested delicately. The corporal grinned with pride. Pablo added, "This baby was probably found in the garden of love, and that is the best kind of babies, for only good things are in it." "We too have been soldiers," said Danny. "When we die, we will go to the grave on a gun carriage, and a firing squad will shoot over us." They waited to see whether the corporal would improve upon the opportunity they had offered. The corporal looked his appreciation. "You have been good to me," he said. "You have been as good and kind as my friends in Torreon would be. This is my baby, the baby of my wife." "And where is your wife?" Pilon asked. The corporal lost his smile. "She is in Mexico," he said. Then he grew vivacious again. "I met a man, and he told me a curious thing. He said we can make of babies what we will. He said, you tell the baby often what you want him to do, and when he grows up, he will do that. Over and over, I tell this baby, you will be a general. Do you think it will be so?" The friends nodded politely. "It may be," said Pilon. "I have not heard of this practice. I say 20 times a day, Manuel, you will be a general some day. You will have big epaulets and a sash. Your sword will be gold. You will ride a Palomino horse. What a life for you, Manuel." The man said he surely will be a general if I say so. Danny got up and went to the apple box. "You will be a general," he said to the baby. "When you grow up, you will be a great general." The others trooped over to see whether the formula had had any effect. The pirate whispered, "You will be a general," and he wondered whether the same method would work on a dog. "The baby is sick, all right," Danny said. "We must keep him warm." They went back to their seats. "Your wife is in Mexico?" Pilon suggested. The corporal wrinkled his brows and thought for a while. Then he smiled brilliantly. "I will tell you. It is not a thing to tell to strangers, but you are my friends. I was a soldier in Chihuahua, and I was diligent and clean and kept oil in my rifle so that I became a caporal. And then I was married to a beautiful girl. I did not say that it was not because of the chevrons that she married me. But she was very beautiful and young. Her eyes were bright. She had good white teeth, and her hair was long and shining. So pretty soon, this baby was born." "That is good," said Danny. "I should like to be you. There is nothing so good as a baby." "Yes," said the corporal, "I was glad. And we went to the baptism. And I wore a sash, although the book of the army did not mention it. And when we came out of the church, a capitan with epaulets and a sash and a silver sword saw my wife. Pretty soon my wife went away. Then I went to that capitan, and I said, 'Give me back my wife.' And he said, 'You do not value your life to talk this way to your superior.'" The corporal spread his hands and lifted his shoulders in a gesture of caged resignation. "Oh, that thief!" cried Jesus Maria. "You gathered your friends? You killed that capitan?" Pablo anticipated. The corporal looked self-conscious. "No, there was nothing to do. The first night, someone shot at me through the window. The second day, a field gun went off by mistake, and it came so close to me that the wind knocked me down. So I went away from there, and I took the baby with me." There was fierceness in the faces of the friends, and their eyes were dangerous. The pirate in his corner snarled, and the dogs growled. "We should have been there," Pilon cried. "We would have made that capitan wish he had never lived. My grandfather suffered at the hands of a priest, and he tied that priest naked to a post in a corral and turned a little calf in with him. Oh, there are ways." "I was only a caporal," said the boy. "I had to run away." Tears of shame were in his eyes. "There is no help for a caporal when a capitan is against him, so I ran away with the baby Manuel." In Fresno, I met this wise man, and he told me I could make Manuel be what I wished. I tell that baby 20 times every day, you will be a general. You will wear epaulets and carry a golden sword. Here was drama that made the experiences of Cornelia Ruiz seem uninteresting and vain. Here was a situation which demanded the action of the friends, but its scene was so remote that action was impossible. They looked in admiration at the corporal. He was so young to have had such an adventure. I wish, Danny said wickedly, that we were in Torreon now. Pilon would make a plan for us. It is too bad we cannot go there. Big Joe Portagee had stayed awake, a tribute to the fascination of the corporal's story. He went to the apple box and looked in. You going to be a general, he said, and then, look, this baby is moving funny. The friends crowded around. The spasm had already started. The little feet kicked down and then drew up. The hands crawled about helplessly, then the baby scrabbled and shuddered. A doctor, Danny cried. We must have a doctor. But he and everyone knew it was no use. Approaching death wears a cloak no one ever mistakes. While they watched, the baby stiffened and the struggle ended. The mouth dropped open and the baby was dead. In kindness, Danny covered the apple box with a piece of blanket. The corporal stood very straight and stared before him, so shocked that he could not speak nor think. Jesus Maria laid a hand on his shoulder and led him to a chair. You are so young, he said. You will have many more babies. The corporal moaned. Now he is dead. Now he will never be a general with that sash and that sword. There were tears in the eyes of the friends. In the corner, all the dogs whined miserably. The pirate buried his big head in the fur of Senor Alec Thompson. In a soft tone, almost a benediction, Pilon said, Now you yourself must kill the Capitan. We honor you for a noble plan of revenge. But that is over, and you must take your own vengeance, and we will help you if we can. The corporal turned dull eyes to meet him. Revenge? He asked. Kill the Capitan? What do you mean? Why, it was plain what your plan was, Pilon said. This baby would grow up, and he would be a general. And in time, he would find the Capitan, and he would kill him slowly. It was a good plan. The long waiting and then the stroke. We, your friends, honor you for it. The corporal was looking bewilderedly at Pilon. What is this? He demanded. I have nothing to do with this Capitan. He is the Capitan. The friends sat forward. Pilon cried. Then what was this plan to make the baby a general? Why was that? The corporal was a little embarrassed then. It is the duty of a father to do well by his child. I wanted Manuel to have more good things than I had. Is that all? Danny cried. Well, said the corporal, my wife was so pretty, and she was not any puta either. She was a good woman, and that Capitan took her. He had little epaulets and a little sash, and his sword was only of a silver color. Consider, said the corporal, and he spread out his hands, if that Capitan with the little epaulets and the little sash could take my wife, imagine what a general with a big sash and cold sword could take. There was a long silence while Danny and Pilon and Pablo and Jesus Maria and the pirate and Big Joe Portagee digested the principle. And when it was digested, they waited for Danny to speak. It is to be pitied, said Danny at last, that so few parents have the well-being of their children at heart. Now we are more sorry than ever that the baby is gone, for with such a father, what a happy life he has missed. And the friends nodded solemnly. What will you do now? Asked Jesus Maria, the discoverer. I will go back to Mexico, said the corporal. I am a soldier in my heart. It may be, if I keep oiling my rifle, I myself may be an officer someday. who can tell? The 6 friends looked at him admiringly. They were proud to have known such a man. Chapter 11. How, under the most adverse circumstances, love came to Big Joe Portagee. For Big Joe Portagee, to feel love was to do something about it. And this is the history of one of his love affairs. It had been raining in Monterey. From the tall pines the water dripped all day. The paisanos of Tortilla Flat did not come out of their houses, but from every chimney a blue column of pinewood smoke drifted so that the air smelled clean and fresh and perfumed. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the rain stopped for a few moments, and Big Joe Portagee, who had been under a rowboat on the beach most of the day, came out and started up the hill toward Danny's house. He was cold and hungry. When he came to the very edge of Tortilla Flat, the skies opened and the rain poured down. In an instant, Big Joe was soaked through. He ran into the nearest house to get out of the rain, and that house was inhabited by Tia Ignacia. The lady was about 45, a widow of long standing and some success. Ordinarily, she was taciturn and harsh, for there was in her veins more Indian blood than is considered decent in Tortilla Flat. When Big Joe entered, she had just opened a gallon of red wine and was preparing to pour out a glass for her stomach's sake. Her attempt to push the jug under a chair was unsuccessful. Big Joe stood in her doorway, dripping water on the floor. "Come in and get dry," said Tia Ignacia. Big Joe, watching the bottle as a terrier watches a bug, entered the room. The rain roared down on the roof. Tia Ignacia poked up a blaze in her airtight stove. "Would you care for a glass of wine?" "Yes," said Big Joe, before he had finished his first glass. Big Joe's eyes had refastened themselves on the jug. He drank 3 glasses before he consented to say a word, and before the wolfishness went out of his eyes. Tia Ignacia had given her new jug of wine up for lost. She drank with him as the only means to preserve a little of it to her own use. It was only when the 4th glass of wine was in his hand that Big Joe relaxed and began to enjoy himself. "This is not Torelli's wine," he said. "No, I get it from an Italian lady who is my friend." She poured out another glass. The early evening came. Tia Ignacia lighted a kerosene lamp and put some wood in the fire. As long as the wine must go, it must go, she thought. Her eyes dwelt on the huge frame of Big Joe Portagee with critical appraisal. A little flush warmed her chest. "You have been working out in the rain, poor man," she said. "Here, take off your coat and let it dry." Big Joe rarely told a lie. His mind didn't work quickly enough. "I've been on the beach under a rowboat asleep," he said. "But you are all wet, poor fellow." She inspected him for some response to her kindness, but on Big Joe's face nothing showed except gratification at being out of the rain and drinking wine. He put out his glass to be filled again, having eaten nothing all day. The wine was having a profound effect on him. Tia Ignacia addressed herself anew to the problem. "It is not good to sit in a wet coat. You will be ill with cold. Come, let me help you take off your coat." Big Joe wedged himself comfortably into his chair. "I'm all right," he said stubbornly. Tia Ignacia poured herself another glass. The fire made a rushing sound to counteract with comfort the drumming of water on the roof. Big Joe made absolutely no move to be friendly, to be gallant, even to recognize the presence of his hostess. He drank his wine in big swallows. He smiled stupidly at the stove. He rocked himself a little in the chair. Anger and despair arose in Tia Ignacia. This pig, she thought, this big and dirty animal. It would be better for me if I brought some cow in the house out of the rain. Another man would say some little friendly word, at least. Big Joe stuck out his glass to be filled again. Now Tia Ignacia strove heroically. In a little warm house there is happiness on such a night, she said. When the rain is dripping and the stove burns sweetly, then is a time for people to feel friendly. Don't you feel friendly? Sure, said Big Joe. Perhaps the light is too bright in your eyes, she said coyly. Would you like me to blow out the light? It don't bother me none, said Big Joe. If you want to save oil, go ahead. She blew down the lamp chimney, and the room leaped to darkness. Then she went back to her chair and waited for his gallantry to awaken. She could hear the gentle rocking of his chair. A little light came from the cracks of the stove and struck the shiny corners of the furniture. The room was nearly luminous with warmth. Tia Ignacia heard his chair stop rocking and braced herself to repel him. Nothing happened. To think, she said, you might be out in the storm, shivering in a shed or lying on the cold sand under a boat. But no, you are sitting in a good chair, drinking good wine, in the company of a lady who is your friend. There was no answer from Big Joe. She could neither hear him nor see him. Tia Ignacia drank off her glass. She threw virtue to the winds. My friend, Cornelia Ruiz, has told me that some of her best friends came to her out of the rain and cold. She comforted them, and they were her good friends. The sound of a little crash came from the direction of Big Joe. She knew he had dropped his glass, but no movement followed the crash. Perhaps he is ill, she thought. Maybe he has fainted. She jumped up, lighted a match, and set it to the lamp wick. And then she turned to her guest. Big Joe was mountainously asleep. His feet stuck out ahead of him. His head was back and his mouth was wide open. While she looked, amazed and shocked, a tremendous rattling snore came from his mouth. Big Joe simply could not be warm and comfortable without going to sleep. It was a moment before Tia Ignacia could move all her crowding emotions into line. She inherited a great deal of Indian blood. She did not cry out. No, shivering with rage although she was, she walked to her wood basket, picked out a likely stick, weighed it, put it down, and picked out another one. And then she turned suddenly on Big Joe Portagee. The first blow caught him on the shoulder and knocked him out of the chair. Pig, Tia Ignacia screamed. Big dirty garbage, out in the mud with you. Joe rolled over on the floor. The next blow made a muddy indentation on the seat of his pants. Big Joe was waking up rapidly now. Huh? He said. What's the matter? What are you doing? I'll show you, she screamed. She flung open her door and ran back to him. Big Joe staggered to his feet under the beating. The stick hammered at his back and shoulders and head. He ran out of the door, protecting his head with his hands. Don't, he pleaded. Now don't do that. What's the matter? The fury followed him like a hornet, down the garden path and into the muddy street. Her rage was terrible. She followed him along the street, still beating him. Hey, he cried. Now don't. He grabbed her and held her while her arms struggled violently to be free to continue the beating. Oh, great garbage pig, she cried. Oh, cow. He could not let her go without more beating, so he held her tightly. And as he stood there, love came to Big Joe Portagee. It sang in his head. It roared through his body like a great freshet. It shook him as a tropical storm shakes a forest of palms. He held her tightly for a moment until her anger relaxed. In the night in Monterey, a policeman patrols the streets on a motorcycle to see that good things come to no evil. Jake Lake rode about now, his slicker shining dully like basalt. He was unhappy and uncomfortable. It was not so bad on the paved streets, but part of his route lay through the mud paths of Tortilla Flat, and there the yellow mud splashed nastily. His little light flashed about. The motor coughed with effort. All of a sudden, Jake Lake cried out in astonishment and stopped his motor. "What the devil? Say, what the hell is this?" Big Joe twisted his neck. "Oh, is that you, Jake? Say, Jake, as long as you're going to take us to jail anyway, can't you just wait a minute?" The policeman turned his motor around. "You get out of the street," he said. "Somebody'll come along and run over you." His motor roared in the mud, and the flicker of his little headlight disappeared around the corner. The rain pattered gently among the trees of Tortilla Flat.